The night they knocked, Jack Callahan sat motionless in his old leather chair, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth. The flames danced, their orange glow flickering across the faded wallpaper of his dimly lit living room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and throwing fistfuls of snow against the glass like some unseen force demanding entry. Jack exhaled, gripping the half-empty whiskey glass in his hand. The drink burned as he swallowed, but not enough to chase away the ghosts of his past. Nothing ever did. 10 years, a full decade since the fire that took everything. He could still hear the roar of the collapsing beams, the thick, suffocating smoke filling his lungs as he clawed his way through the wreckage. Too late. Always too late. His fingers traced the rim of the glass, his other hand resting near a framed photograph on the side table. He hadn't looked at it in years, but he didn't need to. He knew every detail by heart. His wife's warm smile. His little girl's bright eyes, full of mischief and trust. Claire had been 7, just 7, when, bang, bang, bang. The sudden pounding on the front door jolted Jack upright, his pulse spiking. No one ever came here. Not anymore. He frowned, glancing at the clock on the mantel. 10:47 p.m. Visitors were rare in this secluded corner of town. Visitors during a snowstorm. Unheard of. Another sharp knock, followed by a small, muffled voice. "Please, is anyone there?" Jack stiffened. A child. His instincts warred against his better judgment. He didn't do visitors. He didn't do people. Not since the funeral, when the well-meaning neighbors had finally stopped trying to pull them out of his grief. But this wasn't some neighbor or a town busybody. This was a child, standing outside in a storm. Jack muttered a curse under his breath and pushed himself out of his chair. His joints protested, the cold settling deep into his bones as he made his way to the door. He hesitated for only a moment before pulling it open. The wind rushed in, carrying swirling flakes of snow and 2 tiny figures. Twins. They stood on his porch, huddled together, their small faces flushed red from the cold. Their coats were thin, more suited for autumn than a bitter winter night. Their dark hair was dusted with snowflakes, and their hands were clasped together so tightly their knuckles were white. Jack stared at them. They couldn't have been older than 6, maybe 7. The one in front met his eyes. Despite her chattering teeth and trembling lips, she had a fierce determination in her gaze. Something about her expression hit Jack, like a punch to the gut, too familiar, too raw. "Please, mister," the brave twin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're really cold. Can we come inside?" Jack's throat tightened. His first instinct was to shut the door, retreat back to his whiskey and solitude. He didn't need this, didn't want to care. But the other twin stumbled suddenly, her legs giving out beneath her. Her sister caught her, barely keeping her upright. Something snapped inside Jack. Without another word, he stepped aside. The girls hesitated only for a moment before they hurried in, bringing with them a swirl of icy air and the scent of winter. Jack shut the door firmly behind them, shutting out the storm, but knowing, somehow, that he was letting in something that would change everything. Inside the house of ghosts, the warmth of the house seemed to swallow the girls whole as they stepped inside, their small bodies visibly relaxing in the heat. Jack watched them from a distance, his fingers itching with unease. The older twin, the brave one, was still gripping her sister's hand like a lifeline, her wary eyes darting around the room as if assessing whether they had made the right choice. Jack cleared his throat. His voice came out rough, edged with more than just disuse. "Come near the fire. Get warm." They obeyed without hesitation, moving toward the flickering hearth. Up close, Jack could see how bad their condition was. Their cheeks were raw from the wind, their shoes soaked through. The quiet twin, the one who had stumbled, looked exhausted, her face pale, her small hands shaking. Jack grabbed the thick knitted afghan draped over the back of his armchair, the one Sarah's grandmother had made, the one he had never had the heart to pack away. and gently laid it over their shoulders. The quiet twin pulled it closer with one free hand, and for the first time, she looked up at him. Her eyes were the same dark brown as her sister's, but filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 words, so simple, so powerful. They echoed in the silent house, mixing with the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Jack swallowed hard, the tightness in his chest making it difficult to breathe. "What are your names?" he asked gruffly, needing to break the silence. The brave twin spoke first. "Mia." She squeezed her sister's hand. "This is Lily." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm Jack." Lily gave him a small tentative smile before dropping her gaze. Mia, on the other hand, continued to watch him, her eyes sharp and assessing. Jack exhaled and pushed himself to his feet. "You need something hot." "Cocoa." It wasn't a question. It was the only thing he could think to offer. Both girls nodded quickly, their small faces lighting up with something dangerously close to hope. Jack moved to the kitchen, grabbing 2 dusty mugs from the cupboard. He made the cocoa the way he remembered Claire liking it, with extra milk to cool it down faster. As he handed them their drinks, the warmth spread between them, though the tension in the room remained thick. Jack sat in his chair, studying the 2 little strangers who had appeared on his doorstep like ghosts from his past. Something inside him, something long buried, began to shift. "Where's your mother?" he finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Mia hesitated. Her grip on her sister's hand tightened. "She told us to wait," Maya said quietly, her voice fragile but steady. "At the bus stop." Jack frowned. "Tonight? In this weather?" Mia nodded. "She said she'd come back." Jack felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He leaned forward, his firefighter instincts kicking in. Something was wrong, and deep in his gut, Jack knew this was just the beginning. The truth buried in snow. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth, but the cold inside Jack's chest wouldn't go away. Mia and Lily sat together on the couch, still wrapped in the old afghan he had given them. Their small fingers clutched their mugs of cocoa like lifelines. Jack watched them from his armchair, his fingers drumming against the worn leather. Something about this didn't feel right. A mother didn't just leave her children at a bus stop in the middle of a snowstorm. Not unless something was very, very wrong. Jack cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice even. "When did she say she'd be back?" Mia hesitated, glancing at Lily before answering. "This morning." Jack stiffened. "You've been outside since this morning." Mia nodded, her small fingers tightening around the mug. "We waited at the gas station like Mama said, but she didn't come." Lily sniffled, her eyes still on her cocoa. She hadn't said much, but the way she leaned into her sister told Jack everything he needed to know. Lily was scared, but Mia was doing her best to be strong for both of them. Jack exhaled, trying to piece things together. These weren't just lost kids. They had been left somewhere, alone, on purpose. And if their mother hadn't come back, why? "Where do you live?" he asked. Mia hesitated. Lily shifted uncomfortably. "We don't have a house," Mia admitted finally. Jack felt his stomach drop. He rubbed a hand down his face, his fingers scratching against the rough stubble on his chin. He had been hoping for a simple answer, something that would make this not his problem. But there was nothing simple about this. Their mother hadn't just been running late. She had abandoned them. And now they were here, in his house, sitting in his living room, sipping cocoa by his fire. Jack's mind screamed at him to call the cops, to let someone else handle this. This wasn't his fight. These weren't his kids. But looking at them, 2 small girls, huddled together for warmth, trusting him to keep them safe, he couldn't do it. Not yet. He forced his voice to stay calm. "Did she tell you where she was going?" Mia shook her head. "She just said she had something important to do." Jack frowned. The pieces didn't fit together. No money, no home, a mother who left them in a storm and never came back. There was something else going on here, something he wasn't seeing. He sighed, pushing himself up from his chair. "All right. You can stay tonight," he said gruffly. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Mia blinked, surprised. "Really?" Jack grunted. "Don't get too comfortable, kid. It's just for one night." But even as he said the words, he had the nagging feeling that this wasn't going to be just one night. It never was. A house that hasn't been a home in years. Jack dug out old blankets and pillows from the hallway closet, his movements mechanical, his mind racing. Why did these kids look so familiar? There was something about them. Something just out of reach in his memory, like a word on the tip of his tongue. He shook off the feeling and headed back to the living room. "You can sleep on the couch," he said, tossing the blankets over the backrest. "It's old, but it's comfortable." Lily looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "You mean we get to stay together?" Jack hesitated. The fear in her voice twisted something inside him. "Yeah," he said finally. "No one's separating you." Mia let out a breath she'd probably been holding all night. Jack had seen that kind of tension before, the kind that didn't come from just being cold or hungry. These girls had been through something bad, and no one had been there to protect them. Jack clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. They had someone now, even if it was just for tonight. A call for help. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad. Call the cops. Call social services. Call someone. That's what he should do. That's what a normal person would do. But something in his gut told him that if he called the wrong person, these girls might end up somewhere worse than a gas station in the snow. Jack had seen it before. The system didn't always work the way it was supposed to. Foster care wasn't always safe. And if their mother came back, if she really had a reason for leaving them, he needed to know what it was before sending them off with strangers. Instead, he scrolled through his old contacts and found a name he hadn't called in years. Martinez. Jack hesitated only a second before pressing call. The line rang once, twice. Then a familiar gruff voice answered. "Jack, thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jack muttered. "I need a favor." There was a pause. Martinez had been a cop for as long as Jack had known him. Tough, honest, the kind of guy who didn't take crap from anyone. Jack trusted him. That was rare. "What kind of favor?" Martinez asked. Jack exhaled. "I've got 2 kids at my house. About 6, maybe 7. They were left at a gas station. No mom. No home." Another pause. Then Martinez swore under his breath. "Jesus, you sure they're not just lost?" "No. They were left there. On purpose." The cop sighed. "All right. What are their names?" "Mia and Lily." A long silence followed. Jack frowned. "What?" "Jack," Martinez said slowly, his voice different now, more careful. "Where did you say you found them?" Jack's stomach tightened. "They showed up at my door, said their mother told them to wait at the gas station." Martinez exhaled sharply. "Their mother's name isn't Rebecca Torres, is it?" Jack's blood turned to ice. Torres. The name slammed into him like a freight train. Jack's breath hitched. His fingers gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Miguel Torres," he said, barely able to form the words. "The firefighter." Martinez's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Jack's mind spun. No, it couldn't be. Miguel had been one of his trainees, one of the best. Dedicated, brave, the kind of man who ran into fires without hesitation. He had died 3 years ago. A warehouse fire, the ceiling collapsing before he could get out. Jack had been at the funeral. He had shaken hands with the widow. And now, her daughters were sitting in his living room. Martinez sighed. "Jack, those girls, they're Miguel's." The room tilted. Jack gripped the table, his vision tunneling. Miguel's kids, and they had been left on his doorstep. Jack's world shattered. He barely heard Martinez's next words. "We need to find their mother. And fast." Jack's hand shook as he ended the call. He turned toward the living room, where Mia and Lily were curled up under the blankets, their tiny bodies rising and falling with steady, exhausted breaths. Jack's chest ached. Miguel's daughters. And somehow, they had ended up here. With him. And Jack had a sinking feeling that whatever had led them to his door was far from over. The fire that never died. Jack sat in his darkened kitchen, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. The whiskey bottle on the counter remained untouched. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding against his ribs. Miguel tore his daughters. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. 3 years. 3 years since Miguel had died in that warehouse fire, since Jack had stood in the back at the funeral, feeling the guilt claw at his insides. He had trained Miguel, mentored him, told him to trust the job. Now Miguel's kids were in his house, and their mother, Rebecca Torres, was missing. Jack pushed himself up from the chair and moved toward the living room. The twins were still curled up on the couch, lost in the heavy sleep of exhaustion. He watched them for a long moment. They had his eyes. Not his, not really, but Miguel's. Dark, expressive, filled with something unspoken. Jack's chest tightened. He had to find out what happened to Rebecca. Because something told him this wasn't just bad luck. A ghost in the dark. Jack didn't sleep that night. His mind spun through every possibility, every scenario. By morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world buried in snow. Jack sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee as the girls ate the scrambled eggs he had made. Lily carefully separated her food into sections on her plate, while Mia ate fast, like she was afraid it might disappear. Another habit of kids who had gone without. Jack's stomach churned. "Mr. Jack?" Lily asked, her voice hesitant. Jack looked up. "Yeah. Are we gonna have to leave?" The question hit him hard. He had no idea how to answer. These kids had been bounced around from place to place their whole lives. Now, they were wondering if they'd have to pack up and go again. Jack took a breath. "Not today," he said finally. "You're safe here." Lily nodded, but Mia studied him carefully, like she didn't quite believe him. Jack changed the subject. "I need to go into town for a bit," he said. "You two are coming with me." Mia perked up. "Where?" Jack hesitated. He wasn't about to tell them he was heading straight to the police station. "I just need to talk to a friend," he said instead. The girls exchanged a glance, but didn't argue. The truth starts to unravel. By the time Jack pulled into the police station's parking lot, the girls had gone silent in the back seat. Jack could tell they were nervous. "It's just a quick stop," he told them, keeping his voice steady. "You're not in trouble." Mia didn't look convinced. Inside, Officer Martinez was already waiting for him. The older cop looked tired, his salt and pepper hair sticking out slightly under his hat. "Jack," he greeted, nodding toward the girls. "Mia, Lily." The twins didn't answer. Jack crossed his arms. "Any news on Rebecca?" Martinez sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We checked the shelters, hospitals, even some of her old addresses. No sign of her. It's like she disappeared." Jack's jaw clenched. "Does she have a record?" he asked. Martinez hesitated. "Nothing serious. A few warnings, unpaid parking tickets, a restraining order from an old landlord. But she's got a history of moving around, avoiding officials. We know she had money troubles after Miguel passed. But, Jack, this doesn't look good." Jack's stomach dropped. "You think something happened to her?" "I think she was running from something," Martinez said carefully. "And she didn't want to drag the girls with her." Jack felt Mia tense beside him. She had been listening. Before Jack could say anything, Lily grabbed his sleeve, her small fingers trembling. "Mr. Jack," she whispered, her voice softer than the wind outside. Jack knelt down, his firefighter instincts kicking in. "Yeah, kid." She hesitated, then whispered something that made Jack's blood run cold. "Mama said if she didn't come back, we had to hide." Jack's entire body went rigid. Martinez straightened beside him. "Hide? From who?" Lily's fingers tightened on Jack's sleeve. Maya stepped in front of her, protecting her little sister, her small jaw set in defiance. Jack knew that look. That wasn't just fear, that was survival. "I think we need to talk," Jack said, his voice gravelly. Mia hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Jack led them to a small bench in the corner of the station, away from curious eyes. "You can trust me," he said, his voice low. "What else did your mom say?" Mia bit her lip, her small hands clenching into fists in her lap. Lily stayed silent, pressing close to her sister. Jack waited. Finally, Mia exhaled. "Mama told us to stay away from the men in black coats." Jack's pulse spiked. Men in black coats. Martinez frowned, clearly just as thrown as Jack was. "What men?" Jack asked, his voice dangerously calm. Mia shrugged, but Jack saw the tension in her shoulders. "They used to come to the shelter sometimes," she admitted. "Mama would tell us to hide in the bathroom when she talked to them." Jack felt his stomach churn. This wasn't just about a missing mother. Rebecca hadn't just run away. She had been running from someone, and now she was gone. Jack stood up abruptly, his hands clenching at his sides. This wasn't a simple case of abandonment. This was something much worse. And those little girls, Miguel's little girls, were now in the middle of something they didn't even understand. A storm brewing. That night, Jack barely spoke as he made dinner. His mind was moving a mile a minute. Men in black coats, a missing mother, kids told to hide. Jack had a gut feeling this wasn't about debts or bad decisions. Someone had been looking for Rebecca. And now she had vanished. Jack's grip tightened on the knife as he chopped vegetables. What the hell had Miguel's family gotten into? He had to find out. He had to protect those kids. Because if their mother was on the run, Jack had the sickening feeling that whoever she was running from might come looking for them next. The men in black coats. Jack Callahan had spent years battling fire, but he'd never felt heat like this. It burned in his gut, hotter than anything he'd ever faced in his old firefighter days. Anger, fear, a protectiveness he didn't understand. Mia and Lily had been in danger this whole time, and he hadn't even realized it. Men in black coats, their mother missing, a warning to hide. Jack had no idea what kind of storm he was stepping into, but one thing was crystal clear. Whoever those men were, they were still out there. And now, Mia and Lily were with him. Which meant he was now part of this, whether he liked it or not. Something's not right. Jack spent the rest of the day watching. Every car that passed his house, every flicker of movement outside. He didn't like the feeling in his gut. That deep, uneasy sense that something was coming. That night, he stood by the living room window, whiskey untouched on the table behind him. The house was quiet, except for the soft sound of the girls breathing as they slept on the couch. He should call someone. He should let the cops handle this. But the thought of handing Mia and Lily over to the system made his chest tighten. He didn't trust it, and they didn't trust it either. He had seen it in Mia's eyes, the fear of being separated from her sister. Jack exhaled, his breath fogging up the cold glass. He had promised he wouldn't let anyone take them, and he damn well meant it. The first warning. The next morning, Jack woke before dawn. The old habit of early firefighter shifts still burned into his bones. He dressed quickly, pulling on his boots before heading outside to clear the new layer of snow that had fallen overnight. He grabbed the shovel from the porch and stopped cold. There, sticking up from the snow, was a small black envelope. Jack's pulse spiked. He bent down, picking it up carefully. The paper was thick, expensive, and cold to the touch. There was no name, No address, just a folded note inside. Jack unfolded it with cautious fingers. The words inside made his blood run ice cold. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Give them up, or we take them. Jack's hands tightened into fists. His first instinct was to storm down to the police station and demand answers, but he knew better. Whoever sent this wasn't afraid of the cops, which meant they had power, which meant Mia and Lily were in way more danger than he thought. Jack crushed the note in his palm. They had found them, and that meant he was running out of time. Digging up the past. By mid-morning, Jack had made up his mind. He needed to know everything about Miguel Torres, not just the firefighter, not just the rookie Jack had trained years ago, but the man, the father, the husband, the one who had clearly been hiding something. Jack pulled out his old laptop, one he hadn't used in years, and started digging. He searched everything. Firefighter obituaries, news reports, social media posts. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Miguel had died in a warehouse fire, just like Jack remembered. His widow, Rebecca, had struggled after his death, moving around constantly. But then, Jack found something that made his breath catch. An article buried deep in an old news archive. Mysterious fire at high-tech laboratories leaves questions unanswered. Jack's gut clenched. High-tech labs. He knew that name. It was a government-funded research facility. And Miguel's last fire, the one that killed him, it had been in a warehouse owned by high-tech. Jack's heart pounded. Had Miguel died in a normal fire, or had he stumbled into something bigger, something dangerous? Jack's hands shook as he kept reading. The article hinted at a cover-up. Witnesses had reported seeing men in black suits, not firefighters, not paramedics, but government officials clearing the area before the fire was even fully out. Jack sat back, his hands clenching into fists. This wasn't an accident. Miguel had been caught up in something, and now his kids were too. Jack ran a hand down his face. If Miguel had found something, if he had seen something he wasn't supposed to, was that why he had died? And if that was true, was Rebecca in hiding because she knew the truth? Jack's chest tightened. He had been a firefighter for years. He had seen accidents, but this wasn't an accident. They're coming. Jack didn't tell the girls about the note. They were already scared enough. But he did reinforce the locks. He did keep a loaded shotgun near the door. And he didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his armchair, staring at the fire, waiting. Because something told him this wasn't over. And he was right. The knock came at exactly midnight. Not loud, not frantic, just precise. Jack's fingers wrapped around the shotgun as he stood up. He moved to the door, peering through the small side window. A black car was parked at the end of the driveway. And standing in the snow, dressed in a dark coat and gloves, was a man Jack had never seen before. His heart pounded. Jack cracked the door just enough. "You lost?" he asked, voice cold. The man didn't smile. "I'm looking for something." Jack's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Yeah. And what's that?" The man's black eyes flickered past him, toward the inside of the house. Then he smiled, cold as ice. "You already know, Mr. Callahan." Jack's body went rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack growled. The man's smile didn't falter. "I think you do." Jack's pulse roared in his ears. They knew. They knew about Mia and Lily. And they weren't here to ask nicely. Jack exhaled slowly, making a decision he knew he could never take back. "You need to leave," he said, voice low. "Now." The man's smile widened. "We'll be back." Then he turned, walking back to the black car. Jack slammed the door shut and locked it. His chest heaved. This wasn't over. This wasn't even close to over. Jack grabbed the shotgun and moved toward the couch, where Mia and Lily were still fast asleep. His fingers trembled as he pulled the blankets tighter around them. He didn't know who those men were. He didn't know what they wanted. But he knew one thing. He wasn't losing them. Not now. Not ever. Jack sat down, his back against the door, shotgun across his lap. Let them come. He'd fight. Because Mia and Lily weren't just two kids in danger anymore. They were his. The fire inside. Jack Callahan sat with his back against the front door, the shotgun resting across his lap. The house was silent except for the steady breathing of the two little girls asleep on the couch. But outside, the storm was coming. The man in the black coat had promised they'd be back, and Jack knew a threat when he heard one. This wasn't just about a missing mother. This wasn't even about a dead firefighter. This was bigger, and whatever secret Miguel had died for, Jack had just walked straight into it. A plan takes shape. Jack didn't sleep. He sat in the dim glow of the fireplace, his mind spinning through every possible outcome. He needed to get ahead of this. Sitting around waiting for those men to return was a death sentence. Jack was a firefighter, not a cop. But he knew enough about dangerous people to understand one thing. When someone like that comes for you, you don't wait. You move first. By the time morning broke over the snow-covered trees, Jack had made up his mind. They had to disappear. Nowhere is safe. Jack wasn't taking any chances. By noon, the truck was packed with supplies, extra clothes, food, cash, anything they might need if they had to be gone for a while. Mia and Lily didn't ask questions. They had lived on the run before. Jack didn't like how easily they fell into survival mode. As they drove out of town, Jack caught Mia's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Where's the last place your mom took you before she left?" Mia hesitated. Then, finally, "The motel outside the city." Jack nodded. "That's where we're going." Maybe, just maybe, Rebecca had left a clue behind, and Jack was going to find it. The motel. The motel was exactly what Jack expected. Cheap, rundown, and quiet. The kind of place you hide in. Jack parked the truck at the far end of the lot, scanning the cars. Nothing stood out. No black coats, no unmarked vehicles. So far, so good. Jack turned to the girls. "Stay close to me. No wandering." Mia nodded, gripping Lily's hand tightly. Inside, the air smelled like old cigarettes and cheap coffee. The clerk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Jack approached the counter. Jack slid a photo of Rebecca across the counter. "This woman stayed here recently. Room number." The clerk eyed him. "You a cop?" Jack didn't blink. "No." The man sighed, scratching his neck. "Yeah, I remember her. She had the two kids with her. Paid cash. Didn't give a name." Jack's chest tightened. "What room?" The clerk hesitated. Then, 204. Jack nodded and turned to leave. "But then, she left something behind," the clerk added. "Never came back for it." Jack turned slowly. "What?" The man reached under the counter and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Jack took it, his pulse pounding in his ears. His hands trembled as he flipped it open. The pages were filled with frantic, messy writing. Dates, names, addresses, and then, Jack Callahan. Jack's breath caught. Rebecca had written his name, his address. But why? He kept flipping, his gut twisting tighter and tighter, until he found it. The last thing she wrote. "They know about Miguel. They know what he found. If something happens to me, take the girls to Jack. He's the only one who can protect them." Jack felt like he had been punched in the chest. She had sent them to him on purpose, because she had known that they were coming. The attack. Jack had barely processed the words when the first gunshot shattered the motel window. Glass exploded. Jack lunged forward, grabbing the girls and yanking them to the ground. G.E.D.D.O.N. Mia and Lily screamed as Jack covered them with his body. Another shot tore through the room. Jack reached for his gun. But before he could react, the door burst open, and the men in black coats came crashing in. Fight or die. Jack moved on instinct. 1 second, he was shielding the girls. The next, he was slamming his fist into the first guy through the door. The man stumbled back, blood spraying from his nose. Jack grabbed the second guy by the arm, twisting hard. A gun clattered to the floor. Jack kicked it away. Then, a third man grabbed him from behind. Jack elbowed him in the ribs, sending them both crashing into the table. The motel room was too small, too tight. But Jack fought like a cornered animal. One of the men yanked out a knife. Jack dodged, but the blade sliced through his forearm. Pain exploded through him. But he didn't stop. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting so hard he heard bones snap. The knife dropped. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed a lamp off the table and slanted it across the guy's head. The man collapsed. One left. The last man lunged for Mia. Jack saw red. With a roar, he tackled the man to the ground. Punch. 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 He didn't stop until the guy stopped moving. Then, silence. Heavy breathing. Jack staggered back, blood dripping from his arm. Mia and Lily were huddled in the corner, shaking. But they were safe. For now. Nowhere left to run. Jack grabbed the girls and bolted. They didn't stop until they were back in the truck, speeding down the highway. Lily was crying. Mia was silent. Jack's hands shook on the wheel. Rebecca was right. Miguel had found something. Something people were willing to kill for. And now, they weren't just after Rebecca. They were after Jack too. The final stand. Jack didn't know where they were going. He just knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And if they wanted the girls, they were going to have to go through him. Jack gritted his teeth. He was done running. Next time, he'd be ready. Because this time, Jack Callahan was bringing the fight to them. Fire and blood. Jack Callahan had fought fires before. But this was war. The men in black coats had found them. They had hunted them down, tried to take Mia and Lily. They had failed. Now Jack wasn't running anymore. He was going to finish this. The final clue. Jack drove through the night, the truck's tires eating up miles of empty road. His left arm throbbed, blood seeping from the knife wound he'd gotten at the motel. Lily was asleep in the passenger seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mia sat in the back, silent. She hadn't said a word since the fight. Jack's jaw tightened. She had seen too much. They both had. And it wasn't over yet. Jack reached into his jacket, pulling out the worn notebook Rebecca had left behind. His name was written inside it. She had sent the girls to him on purpose. But why? Jack flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the frantic writing. Then he found it. An address. An old, abandoned fire station. Jack's heart pounded. He knew that place. It had been Miguel's first assignment. And it was only an hour away. Jack gripped the wheel. Rebecca had left him a trail. And now he was going to follow it. The safe house. The fire station was a skeleton of what it once was. Broken windows, rusted doors. But the sign above the entrance was still there. Station 47. Jack's old station. Miguel's old station. Jack pulled the truck around back, where no one could see it from the road. He got out slowly, his gun in one hand, his flashlight in the other. "Stay here," he told the girls. Mia grabbed his wrist. "What if they come back?" she whispered. Jack knelt down. "They won't," he said. "Not before I find out what they're looking for." Mia hesitated. Then, slowly, she let go. Jack turned and stepped inside. The truth in the ashes. The air inside smelled of dust and memories. Jack's boots crunched on the old tile floor as he moved through the abandoned station. Everything was just like he remembered. The old lockers, the fire pole, the dusty kitchen table where the guys used to sit, drinking bad coffee and telling stories. Jack swallowed hard. He had spent years trying to forget this place. But now it was the only place left that had answers. He moved toward the back, where the chief's office used to be. The door was locked. Jack kicked it open. Inside, the office was a mess. Papers scattered, chairs overturned. Someone had been here, looking for something. Jack moved carefully, shining his light across the room. Then, he saw it, a hidden safe built into the wall. Jack's chest tightened. He knelt down, brushing away the dust. The combination lock was still intact. Jack frowned. Miguel wouldn't have hidden something without leaving a way to find it. Jack glanced back at the notebook, flipping through the pages. His eyes stopped on a series of numbers written in the margins. 47 to 1978. The station number. Miguel's badge number. His year of birth. Jack held his breath. He turned the dial. 1 click. 2 clicks. 3. The safe unlocked. Jack opened it. Inside, there was only one thing. A flash drive. Jack stared at it. His pulse hammered. This was it. This was what Miguel had died for. Jack grabbed it and turned to leave. Then, footsteps outside. The fire comes to him. Jack froze. Then, slowly, he moved toward the door. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. More footsteps. Someone was inside the station. Jack's grip tightened around his gun. They had found him. Jack exhaled slowly. Then, in one fluid motion, he stepped out of the office. Gun raised. 2 men, both in black coats, both holding weapons. One of them smirked. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Callahan?" Jack's heart pounded. "Who are you?" he growled. The man stepped forward, his boots echoing on the tile. "We're the cleanup crew," he said. "And you're in the way." Jack pulled the trigger. The fight for survival. The first gunshot rang out, shattering the silence. Jack dove for cover behind a desk as bullets ripped through the air. The men moved fast, trained. Jack peeked out, firing a shot. One of them stumbled back, clutching his arm. The other kept coming. Jack rolled behind an overturned table, his breathing fast. Then, a sound outside. Jack's blood ran cold. Mia and Lily. The men had seen the truck. They knew the girls were out there. Jack didn't think. He moved. He fired twice, taking the second man down. The first was already running toward the door. Jack chased after him. But before he could reach him, the station exploded in flames. Everything burns. Jack staggered back, the heat slamming into him like a wave. The fire spread fast, licking up the walls, devouring the old wooden beams. Someone had set the place to burn. Jack's eyes darted toward the exit. He had seconds to get out. Through the flames, he saw the first man, bleeding, limping, escape into the night. Jack let him go. The girls. He had to get to the girls. Jack ran. The fire roared around him, smoke filling his lungs. His body screamed at him to stop, but he kept going. At last, he burst through the front doors and into the cold night. Mia and Lily were in the truck, eyes wide with fear. Jack threw himself inside, slamming the door. Then, without looking back, he sped away. Behind them, Station 47 collapsed in flames. The end of the road. Jack didn't stop driving until the sun rose over the horizon. The girls were asleep in the back seat. Jack's hands were shaking on the wheel. The flash drive sat on the dashboard, the last thing Miguel had left behind. Jack exhaled. Whatever was on it, it was worth killing for. And now, Jack was going to use it. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. But now Jack had the truth, and he was going to burn them down with it. Burn it all down. Jack Callahan had spent a lifetime running into fires. Now, for the first time, he was about to set one. The truth on the flash drive. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold as Jack pulled the truck onto an empty dirt road. The air was still, the silence stretching like a warning. He parked near an abandoned gas station, stepping out and leaning against the truck. His hands still shook from the night before. In the back seat, Mia and Lily were curled up beneath an old blanket, still asleep. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. This was it. Everything Miguel died for. Jack pulled out his old laptop and plugged the drive in. His heart pounded as the files loaded. A video file. Jack clicked it, his breath held tight in his chest. The footage was grainy, security camera quality. At first, it showed nothing. Just a dark warehouse, stacks of crates lining the walls. Then, movement. Miguel walked into the frame. Jack's chest tightened. His old trainee, his friend, alive, moving, fighting for his life. Miguel pulled out his phone, recording something on one of the crates. Jack paused the video, zooming in. There, stamped on the crate, was a government logo. High-tech laboratories. Jack's blood ran cold. Miguel had stumbled onto something classified. Something deadly. Jack hit play. The footage showed figures in the shadows. Men in black coats. One of them raised a gun. Miguel spun, raising his hands. His voice was muffled, but Jack could make out the words. People need to know the truth. The gun fired. Miguel collapsed. The screen went black. Jack clenched his jaw, breathing hard. This wasn't just an accident. Miguel had been executed. And now, the same people wanted his kids. Jack closed the laptop, his hands curled into fists. This ends tonight. The final call. Jack stared at his phone for a long time before dialing. Martinez answered on the first ring. Jack. His voice was tense. I've got proof, Jack said. A pause. Then, where are you? Doesn't matter. Jack's voice was flat. I need you to do something for me. Martinez hesitated. Jack, you still got contacts at the local news station. Martinez cursed under his breath. You want to go public with this? They killed Miguel, Jack said. They're trying to clean it up. That stops now. Another silence. Then, send it to me. Jack exhaled, emailing the files over. Martinez's voice was dead serious. You just put a target on your back, Callahan. Jack's lips curled into a grim smile. Good. One last stand. Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. So he waited. He parked the truck outside an abandoned cabin in the woods, an old hunting spot he used years ago. Mia and Lily sat beside him, their eyes wide with worry. Mr. Jack, Lily whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Are they gonna find us? Jack ran a hand through her dark hair. Yeah, kiddo, he said softly. But this time, I'll be ready. Mia clenched her fists. What are you gonna do? Jack looked toward the tree line, where the sun had set behind the mountains. He checked his shotgun, and he waited. The final battle. The attack came at midnight. Jack heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Then, movement in the trees. They were here. Jack grabbed his gun, motioning for the girls to stay low. Then he stepped outside. A black SUV sat at the edge of the clearing. The same man from the motel stepped out. His coat fluttered in the wind, his hands clasped behind his back. Jack Callahan, he said, his voice smooth as silk. You should have stayed out of this. Jack cocked his shotgun. You should have left those kids alone. The man sighed. We both know how this ends. Jack's grip tightened. Yeah, with you in the ground. The man's smile disappeared. Kill him. Gunfire exploded. Jack dove behind the truck, returning fire. Boom. 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 Two of the men dropped. The third lunged forward. Too fast. Jack twisted, slamming the shotgun against his face. The man crumpled. Only one left. The leader. Jack turned just in time to see him raise a pistol. Jack's heart stopped. A single gunshot rang out. Jack braced for pain. But the man staggered back, a bullet hole in his chest. Jack's eyes snapped to the cabin. Mia. She stood there, holding a pistol with shaking hands. Her face was pale. Jack rushed forward, catching her before she collapsed. You, Jack choked out. You shot him. Mia nodded, her breath ragged. He was gonna kill you. Jack pulled her close. You did good, kid, he whispered. Behind them, the leader slumped to the ground, his eyes still open, but lifeless. It was over. The aftermath. By sunrise, the cabin was swarming with police. Martinez arrived first, his eyes scanning the scene. You okay? Jack exhaled. I will be. Martinez looked down at the bodies in the snow. They won't be coming back. Jack nodded. He looked back at the truck, where Mia and Lily sat together, safe. What happens now? Jack asked. Martinez sighed. The files you sent me. They're everywhere. News stations, law enforcement. There's an investigation now. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Miguel's death wasn't in vain. Jack walked to the truck, where the girls watched him carefully. Lily was biting her lip. Are we going to another home? She whispered. Jack stilled. Mia looked away. She already knew the answer. Jack crouched in front of them. No, he said. Mia's eyes snapped to his. You're staying with me, Jack said. If that's what you want. Lily burst into tears. Mia nodded, wiping at her face. We want that, she whispered. Jack pulled them close. He had lost one family before. He wasn't losing this one. Not now. Not ever. 1 year later, the house wasn't silent anymore. Jack sat on the porch, watching as Mia and Lily ran through the yard, laughing. A year had passed since the night he nearly lost them. And every day, Jack thanked Miguel. He had found something he never thought he'd have again. A reason to keep going. Maya stopped suddenly, turning toward him. Mr. Jack. Yeah, kid. She hesitated. Then, can we call you Dad? Jack's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, his eyes burning. Then he smiled. Yeah, kid, he said. You can. Mia grinned. Lily hugged him tight. Jack wrapped his arms around them, holding on as the last of his old walls finally crumbled. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't just existing. He was home.